Well, I've heard the bell, so I guess it's time for us to go ahead and get started. I want to welcome you back to our class as we continue thinking about how we can be the best husband ever. The interviews, I think, have gone well so far. I've enjoyed the approach to the class. Each week we try to remind you the model and the mindset. We are following the model, the example of Jesus. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. The mindset really is the golden rule. Treating our wife the way we would like for her to treat us. Now that's not dependent on reciprocation. That's not dependent on, she did this and then I'm going to respond. No, we follow the golden rule. And as the head, we're supposed to set the tone. We're supposed to set the pace for that. I am really thankful that Bailey McBride is joining us tonight. From time to time in my personal devotional life, I will just kind of walk through my life in prayer and thank God for people that God put in my life, the right people at the right time. And when I was a student at Oklahoma Christian, one of the people that really influenced my faith, a couple that influenced my faith, Bailey and Joyce McBride. I think you would understand, I almost said Joyce and Bailey, opposite way there, but
that's the way to say it.
That's the way to say it. They hosted a Bible study in their home that I got to participate in, and their hospitality, their encouragement, their faith really was a big impact on me and my faith, and part of the reason I decided to go into ministry. So thank you for joining us, and if you would, lead us in prayer as we get started.
Let's pray. Dear God, we're so thankful that you bless us and that you care for us. We're thankful, Father, that you give us the institution of marriage, a wonderful basis for relationship, a relationship that is often the basis of our spiritual growth and our growth of social beings and our growth of people who know how to take the role of leadership and to care for families. Father, we pray for everybody in this class that men who lead families are seeking to be better husbands, seeking to be wiser in the way they work within their family. And we pray your blessings on us tonight as we begin to think about what it means to be really attentive to a wife. In Christ's name, amen.
Amen. We're privileged also to have Linda with us this evening, and we'll have time, I think, in our interview to talk about how God brought her into your life. But let's start with how you and Joyce met and how long the two of you were married.
I met Joyce at David Lipscomb College at the beginning of my junior year. Her roommate was a longtime friend of mine from Tulsa, Oklahoma. And she had told me during the summer that there was someone that she wanted me to meet. And so first night before classes started, we were all in the student center. And so I met Joyce in the fall of 1954. We were married on April 26, 1956, and we were married 12 days short of 59 years. A marvelous life that produced 3 children, 8 grandchildren, and 5 great-grandchildren at this point. A very special woman, a woman of great faith, a woman whose faith grew every year that I knew her. One of her great callings was to teach children. She taught pre-kindergarten class at Memorial Road Church for 47 years. 47 years. 9 months out of the year she taught. She took December, January, and February off because Christmas was the big time for her. She loved Christmas. And so she spent that time getting ready to have all of her family in for Christmas. And On April the 1st, she had a minor procedure done to take care of a little growth on her vocal cords. And she did fine. Outpatient surgery, went home, had a good night's sleep. The next day, she was doing fine until about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. She was taking a nap. And she woke up and said, I don't really feel good. I don't know what's going on. And we took her temperature and she had fever. And my daughter came over and we all took her to the emergency room. They said, well, it looks like she has pneumonia. So she went to St. Anthony's with supposedly a case of pneumonia. About 2 o'clock in the morning, I was in the recliner beside her bed, and she sat upright and said, I can't breathe. I'm hurting all through my chest. Called the nurses and the critical care unit. They came, took her to the critical care unit, left me in a waiting room from about 3 till 6. And at 6, I went in and she was she had tubes all over, and it gave me the situation. She had a massive heart attack, and it appeared that she might be able to recover for about 4 or 5 days. Well, she actually lingered for 2 weeks, and that was a blessing. We didn't think so at the time, but it was a blessing because it gave us time. All of our children and grandchildren came, and she got to see her great-grandson who was living in had been born and was living in Costa Rica. So she got to see she'd seen her great-granddaughter earlier. So it was a very special time for the family, and gave us time to think about what we wanted to do, and so she passed away about 3:15 on that afternoon.
You mentioned her Bible class. I think they'd be interested in what was the verse that she taught all of the. First of all, what age was it, and what was the verse then that she taught them?
They were 4 and 5 year olds. They were kids that were going to go to kindergarten the next fall, and her central theme was the 23rd Psalm, and everybody that ever went through that class memorized the 23rd Psalm in the King James Version. She never quite got around to one of those newer translations. And at her memorial service, her class and about 50 other young kids and probably 20 adults who stood and all said the 23rd Psalm as part of her memorial service. Her hallmark on a church and on a group of children, very important part of her life.
Woman of great faith that left an impact, I think, on everybody that met her. When we were preparing for the class, I want you to answer the question, what does it mean to you to be attentive? And I said, I don't want a Webster's dictionary definition, but just in your mind, when you hear that phrase, what does it mean to you?
Well, one of the things that I think that very, very definitely means being a listener. Mm-hmm. If you're going to be attentive, you're going to have to listen to the whole conversation. And I have to admit that I'm not always like that. I can hear the first few sentences and then I drift off thinking about what I've heard, and I don't hear the last part of it. And I got called on the carpet several times in those 59 years because she noticed that I was tuning her out. And so I learned that to be a good listener, you have to be attentive and care for what's happening and what she's telling you. I think it's also means watching and seeing what's going on. You know, mothers have a great capacity to know about their children. If children come home from school, they can almost tell you what kind of day the child had. They know if the child got into trouble, or if the child was having a struggle with something in school or conflict with another student. And I think we have to be that way with the people around us, the people we love and care for. We have to spend some time listening to them and watching them and sensing their moods. So I think it's a matter of being attentive as a listener, and it's also being watchful to see what's happening and to see how people are feeling and what's going on in their hearts and minds, because that's really important. I mean, the building of a real relationship grows out of our connection about everything in our life, and really important part of that whole process.
When we talked on Monday, you said something about perceiving needs and desires even if they are unspoken. Is that more the watching or the listening, or what did you have in mind when you said that?
Well, I think that's more the matter of watching. And it also depends on the kind of relationship that a husband and wife have. If husbands and wives discuss everything about their life together, it's probably going to come out in a conversation. If two people are busy and spend a certain amount of time with each other but not a lot of time together, it may be that husbands will only understand when they perceive by the actions or the mood or the feelings of that other person. And so I encourage you to develop that relationship in such a way that a need is absolutely spoken. I want to tell you that I didn't always understand that. It took me about 16 years to understand that I was married to a woman who was very reluctant to tell me anything that she was thinking about and something that she really needed. Something she needed me to step in and help her with. And so you have to learn. You have to learn because you grow in your understanding of each other.
So the watching and perception is important. Listening, though, is going to stand out as one of the most important aspects of being attentive. What are the, in your opinion, keys to being a good listener in some of the common mistakes that men tend to make?
Well, I already confessed that you sometimes tune your wife out.
Bailey, when I was finishing my graduate degree, I can't remember the person I was interviewing for my degree program. It was a ministry that I was developing for the local church, and he startled me at one point in the phone call when he said, "Repeat the last three things I just said to you." And I don't know why he picked up on the fact that I had taken a mental trip and was not I'm thankful that my wife has not tried that with me, but keys to good listening and some of the common mistakes.
Well, and it's an important thing. Sometimes, even if your wife doesn't ask you to repeat what she's just told you, it may be a good idea to tell her in your own words what you think you've heard, because you may have heard something different from what she meant to be saying to you. And if you do that, if you exchange that role and you repeat her conversation, then you begin to grow in your understanding of each other. I didn't go through marriage counseling when I got married in 1956, but before Linda and I got married, we went to marriage counseling. I began that session with our marriage counselor by saying, you have to remember that between the two of us, we have 101 years of marriage experience.
It's not intimidating at all.
Well, we had a very good counselor who knew what to do, and one of the things she said is, you need to be active listeners, and that means listening to and repeating what you've heard so that it becomes very clear to both of you what's going on and what the thoughts are.
You know, some of you will know Gary Looper. We've got excellent elders here, but Gary always stood out to me in an elders meeting when someone came in to talk to the elders, that he would do what Bailey just described. He would repeat back to them what they said. And I thought one thing that made him such a great elder was he was a really good listener. And I think that applies to every relationship, especially the relationship we enjoy with our spouse. Anything else on that? You want to say anything more possibly about some of the common mistakes that we tend to make?
Well, I think one of the big things is that we tend to assume that what we want is the same thing that our spouse wants. Women can be guilty of that, and men can be guilty of that. I think men are more likely to be that way because we kind of think, well, we're the ones that provide the leadership, and so we're thinking this way, and so this is something that I think we ought to do. I never thought we needed a vacation. My work was consuming and a great joy to me. I love teaching, and one of the great experiences of my life was teaching. And so I was never interested in a vacation. I was interested in having time off to study more for what I was going to teach next. And it was my wife who would say, we're shutting it down. Everything's going in the box right now, and we're taking off. We're leaving. We're leaving town. We're taking 2 weeks. No books. No books for 2 weeks. That was a hard thing, but it was very important because she understood that I needed to be refreshed, and I could only do that by getting away and developing a new perspective.
I like every part of that except the no books for 2 weeks. That would be really hard. One of the common mistakes, I think, the way men listen is they want to solve. And I think one thing I had to learn is that my wife is many times smarter than me, and she already knew how she was going to solve a problem. She just wanted to share it with me and wanted me to listen, wanted me to enter in to what was going on and be supportive. So I think we can sometimes want to rush to the solution instead of just patiently listening. Anything else on that?
Well, being a good listener is so important in everything we do. In our work with our colleagues, it's important that we listen to what they're telling us and watch for signs that they have something more they want to say that they haven't yet said. So I think that's really a key thing of all relationships. If you want to be have a lot of friends, be a good listener. A good listener is hard to find. And so if you're a good listener, everybody will seek you out because they like to talk to you, because they know you understand what they've said, and then you've been listening attentively.
You know, one of the blessings of a good family and a good church family is you're surrounded by good examples, people that you kind of learn many times how to be a better man, a better husband, better father by good examples that surround you. Are there couples that you and Joyce learned the importance, just by watching them, that you learned more about the importance of attentiveness?
I think of Howard and Marilyn Leftwich. Howard is a longtime elder at Memorial Road. He used to be a neighbor, lived around the corner from me, came to work at OC after he had a very successful career as an accountant in one of the large companies in Kansas City. He decided that he'd like to do something else with his life, and so he came. But one of the things that I learned from Howard was how attentive he was to Marilyn. He always understood when she was not feeling well, and he picked up the duties that would have been hers and she would have done if she had not been a little bit ill and a little bit worn down. He was also very good at understanding when she needed something but wasn't voicing it. So he was a very good example to me of a person who was an attentive husband. Another younger couple, Dan and Jeannie Sykes led a home Bible study group that we were a part of for 12 years. And in those 12 years, they had everybody to their house every Monday night. And Jeannie always had prepared delicious food for us. But the thing that I noticed in that relationship was how thoughtful Dan was of everything about Jeannie. Jeannie is one of those women with a serious commitment to quilting. And if she was at the point of finishing a quilt, Dan would say, "I'll pick up pizza on the way home so you can get to work sooner." And if she was getting ready for the group to come over and she was running a little bit late, it was Dan who would make sure that all the chairs were in the proper place and everything was ready for everybody to come. I'd actually known Dan's mother when I was a student, and I know that a lot of what his ability to understand what Jeannie needed was he learned from his mother, who was a very outspoken and a woman who didn't hesitate to speak her mind about things. And so I've seen Jeannie and Dan as a really great young couple. I guess their youngest child is now 22, so you can figure out where they may fall in all of this.
I remember when my mother called on my 40th birthday and said, "How's it feel to be 40?" And I said, "I don't know, Mother. How does it feel to have a son that's 40? She didn't think that was funny. Did you want to say some things? You had mentioned the other day some things about your mom and dad. Did you want to talk about that?
Well, one of the things that helped set my life on the right course was I had a father who was a romantic. He loved my mother dearly. She never did anything that he didn't praise. She was a beautiful woman, and he was always complimenting the way she appeared, the way she looked, and was very, very thoughtful of all the things that he did for her, that he could do for her. And it was a good thing for me to watch him. He didn't stay that way, unfortunately, as they grew older. He got more introverted and she became more outgoing. And so it wasn't the same way at the end of their life as it was at the beginning. But I still remember that when we were driving somewhere in a little coupe, I never got to sit in the middle. My mother always sat in the middle by my father, and I had to sit on the side. Now, by the time I was 8, that was the ideal position. I didn't want to be in the middle, but it was just those little things like that that made such a difference.
When we talked the other day, I mentioned part of the class, and I think part of the strength of the class is when we discuss openly some of the struggles we've had to become what we now are. I think for those of us that we have role models, and some of them have spoken in this class, that we can't hardly imagine them struggling with some of the things we've talked about. And so I just think it's fair to ask, have you always been attentive? If not, why did you change, and what do you think motivated that?
Well, I think I was not as attentive probably after our children were born. It seemed that my wife was very busy with the children, and I had a really active career that took a lot of time. I mean, talk about a 40-hour work week. I would have loved that. It took more like 60 hours to do what I needed to do. And so I got too busy, and I wasn't paying very much attention. And I got a wake-up call when a podiatrist told my wife that she had to have foot surgery and had to be off her feet for 6 weeks. So suddenly I had those duties that she had been doing all the time. And that was a wake-up call for me. One of the big wake-up calls that I've shared with Tim and with my current wife is when I married my wife, there were things about her I wanted to change. She was a good woman, and she did the right things most of the time. I was trained in literature. I love novels. I love stories. I love poetry. I love plays. Joyce was a lover of factual information. She read biographies. She read 3 news magazines from cover to cover every week. She always wanted to know what was going on. But if I started reading a short story to her, she would say, "I'm sorry, I don't have time for that." Well, for 16 years, I tried to change her taste. And finally, I made up my mind, this is a total waste of time. I'm not going to do this. She's who she is, and I'm not changing that. So for our 16th wedding anniversary, I bought her a very expensive ring and gave it to her for that and told her, I'm going to be a different husband for the next 16 years. And I wish I had explained to her that I really understood what I had been doing wrong. But I didn't. I just said, I'm going to show you how I love you in the next few years. So I don't think we can change our mate. I think we accept them as they are. And if there is something that needs to change, in the course of time, they will recognize it and they will bring the change. You can mold your children, but you can't mold your spouse.
If you're taking notes, that'd be a pretty good thing to write down. Sometimes we're doing good things, and I would say even great things, and that take us away from our wife and our children. And I know not only did you have a great job at Oklahoma Christian, that was a ministry as well, I think. And then you also had a very important role in the church. How did that sometimes, the word compete, I think would be okay. How did that compete with family time?
That was a major competitions, yeah. You know, you got to make decisions about who's going to be the new chemistry teacher. You got to make decisions of whether or not the university can do this program or that program. So it was a big challenge, and so my work took a lot of time. And then there were always those issues at church. I think because I'm a pretty good listener, I think I was the elder that people always came to when they had an issue or a problem that they wanted to talk about. So I'm in the middle of dinner, I might get a phone call that I'd have to return a little bit later, and that would go on for 45 minutes to an hour. Family time. I'm not sure how you manage that, but it's one of those things that we all have to be realistic about. And we probably should be talking openly with our family about it. When I was asked to be an elder at Memorial Road, it was College Church at that time, I told the person who came to ask me if I would be willing to serve, I said, no, I'm too young. I have a 10-year-old son who needs a lot of time. Well, a group of elders came back and said, we really need you to do this for us. So I agreed to do it. I'm happy to tell you that Memorial Road has changed that policy. They do not ask men to be elders who still have children at home, children that are under 15 or 16. 15 or 16, you're lucky if you get to see your kids because they're always on the move. So it's a different thing. It's a different situation. But it is, you want to be sure that when you take responsibilities, you can do it and do the things that you're already committed to do.
When you say yes to one thing, you have to say no to other valuable things. And I think something a lot of folks don't understand from an insider's perspective is the sacrifice that not just church leaders, but the sacrifice their wives make and how much they share their husbands with the church. And it is a sacrifice.
And wives are more likely to understand it than children.
Well, what are the special times when special attention is needed, and some of those occasions in your marriage?
I remember in 1976, my wife's mother died suddenly. She had been healthy and well, had never had any problems. She was going home from going out to eat with her husband after church on Sunday, had a massive heart attack, and did not recover. Was dead on the spot. I knew that was a big loss, but it took me a long time to realize that grieving process was going on for months and years. She'd been very close to both of her parents, much closer to her father than to her mother. And I'm not sure all the things that were involved, but it was a terrible time. And at probably the first 6 months, I was a pretty understanding husband. At the next 6 months, I was not very good. And finally, we had a conversation, and I apologized that I had been so negligent and unresponsive. And so that's one of those lessons that we need to learn. There comes a time, if your children are having difficulties of any sort, wives are going to sense it and know about it much sooner than you probably will be knowing about it. And sometimes health issues that are kind of hidden from you but are very important in your wife's life, and so it's very important to be responsive to that. I've learned a lot, I think. I've still got a lot to learn.
A couple of key passages that come to mind when you think about the importance of being attentive.
Well, one of the things that I love so much is that passage in Ephesians where we're told to love our wives as we love our own bodies. I don't know about you, but I've been very concerned about my health ever since I was 30. I saw the effects of eating wrong with my parents. I saw my friends having heart attacks, having kidney failure. And so I became very conscious about my health. And I try to take good care of myself. I try to walk the OC Trail. I haven't been very good at it since I came back from Europe, but it's going to come back, and we'll do 2.5 miles every day. And it's very important to take good care of your own body. Well, if you care for your own body, how much more you're going to care for that precious body that has committed to spend a lifetime with you. Somebody that has pledged her life to yours. So you have to be very mindful of the person that you love. And in the same way that you take care of yourself, you take care of them, and you do what makes them happy.
Any other passages, or mainly, I like that idea. We've talked about husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church, but in that same context, as you love yourself, as you love your own body.
Yeah, well, I think about the whole concept of creation. Adam is created first, and God immediately recognizes that Adam is not sufficient by himself, that he needs help, and help of a major kind. And so Eve is created. So when we think about the beginning of it, our relationship with that special woman, we have to realize that that special woman brings something that helps complement and fulfill us, something that brings out the best in us. And so I think it's a very fundamental issue that we have to find real love and commitment in our relationships.
Seems like a good segue from "it's not good for man to be alone" to "how did you meet Linda? And how long have you all been married?"
Well, I met Linda in January of 2016. I had a good friend from Japan who was staying at Teal Ridge, and I would go to pick him up after breakfast or during breakfast, and he was always sitting with Linda and two other people. So I got to know Linda and those people. And then when I moved to Teal Ridge at the invitation of the university, as they were turning it into student housing, my daughter and I were sent out of the house where everything was being loaded because we were getting in the way. And so my daughter came over and introduced herself to Linda. And after my daughter left, after Linda left, my daughter said, "That's a nice woman. You should spend some time with her." Well, I didn't spend time with her. I thought my way of healing was to go and work at the church in Vienna, a church where six adults that I knew very well from college days had been part of a church plant. And so I spent 10 weeks in Vienna in 1960, in the summer of 2016. You can tell my age, can't you?
Back in 1916.
And so I came home, and the second week I was home, I was about to go to lunch, and I saw Linda going to the dining room, and I intercepted her, and I said, "We're friends, aren't we?" And she said, "I think so." And I said, "Would you have lunch with a friend?" Well, I was just having somebody to talk to at lunch. Well, it turned out to be such an interesting lunch meeting that I immediately found her phone number in the directory at Teal Ridge and called her and asked her to have lunch on Thursday. And it got to be kind of a habit. I went to Tennessee to see my oldest daughter on sometime in September. And I came back got home about 8 o'clock at night. I called Linda and asked if I could come down. So I went down and met her at the door and started telling her how much I was enjoying spending time with her, and she was telling me the same thing. And so we found out that we had a mutual relationship, good relationship. So we've been married 5 months on Friday, 5 months on Friday. We were married April the 10th. Some people have said, "You really rushed it, didn't you?" And my stock answer to that, at my age, you rush anything that's important to you.
That bell says we have 5 minutes left. Let me tell you some questions, and you decide which ones you want to address. Lessons you might have learned from Joyce that have helped you be more attentive to Linda. What to do, how to make amends when you've not been attentive as you should be, and then regrets. Do you have any regrets about not being attentive enough? You take any of those you want as we wrap up the class.
Well, one of the things I learned from my relationship with Joyce is I learned that it isn't your job to change people. It's your relationship to love people. That's your duty. And so one of the things that has been very special about the relationship that I've had with Linda is that early on we both said we won't play any games. We're going to be straightforward. We're going to always speak the truth to each other. We're not going to we're going to not work on something covertly, but we're going to just talk to each other straightforwardly. So by the time I had known Linda 6 months, I knew her better than I knew my wife of 59 years, because there was always total honesty. And speaking the truth in love is the thing that brings people very close to each other. And yeah, I have regrets about not being attentive enough. Sometimes I think Linda would like for me to be a little less attentive. She feels like I breathe down her neck all the time, and I probably do. But I would say this, although when Joyce died, I never ever thought there would be another woman in my life. But sometimes God has a plan that you don't know about. And one of the things that immediately attracted me to Linda is her godliness, her goodness. She is in every way as thoughtful and careful with people as anyone can be. She's the best friend of every person that lives at Teal Ridge. She knows what's wrong with them. She knows their health issues. She knows their family. And she's always a caretaker for the things that are going on with them. So God has a way of doing things in His way that's a blessing to us, even though we may not have expected it.
I thought, as we were talking, especially on the theme of being attentive, I don't know what made this thought come to me, but there's an old Jeff Foxworthy joke that he's talking about how our wives train us. And he said on a very cold winter night, his wife just rolled over and said to him, "I'm cold." And he said, "I was out of bed all the way down the hallway to the thermostat before the thought occurred to me, I'm not cold." And I think sometimes if you're not careful, that will be presented to you as a weakness. That's a strength. To be tuned in, to put her needs ahead of yours, to really be attentive. You're not losing in the relationship. I think when we interviewed Dan, he talked about a bigger shovel. I had a bigger shovel. And he took joy in pouring out care and attention to his wife. That's how we become the best husband ever. By loving our wives with that selfless and sacrificial love of Jesus Christ. Check out the back page there on your honey-do list. I put the passage there from James 1. Quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry. And I want you to think about ways that you can be more attentive and be a better listener. We put some thoughts down there, some things you can practice, and I hope you'll do that. Bailey, thanks for being with us.
Great to be here. Thank you. You've been very attentive.